The Polish economic miracle, how they beat the West. Imagine you're standing in the center of Warsaw. The year is 1989. The air smells like cold smoke, damp concrete, and quiet panic. Your pockets are stuffed with cash, millions of zloty, but it might as well be monopoly money. You can't buy bread, can't buy meat. The shelves are empty. The factories are silent. The buildings are gray, chipped, exhausted. The economy is not struggling. It is dead on arrival. If someone told you, standing there in that frozen wasteland, that in just 30 years this country would be wealthier than Portugal, on track to rival the United Kingdom, and become the manufacturing engine of an entire continent, you'd tell them to lay off the vodka. And yet, that is exactly what happened. Because while the rest of Europe was drowning during the 2008 global financial crisis, Poland did something almost obscene in the eyes of economists. It didn't just survive, it grew. Every other EU country slipped into recession. Germany, France, Italy. The UK, Poland didn't. They called it the green island, a lone patch of economic growth surrounded by a sea of red ink. But this story is not a fairy tale. There are no magical reforms, no gentle transitions, no painless adjustments. This is a story about trauma, about taking pain early, in bulk, without anesthesia, discovering that suffering, when applied correctly, can harden an economy instead of killing it. This is how Poland beat the West at its own game. And to understand that, you have to start with the moment Poland chose to do something no politician ever wants to do. Something almost suicidal. They chose to kill their own economy, to save it. In 1989, communism collapsed almost overnight. The party was gone, but it left behind a corpse. State-owned factories producing useless goods. Artificial prices disconnected from reality. And inflation so violent it warped time itself. Inflation was running at 640%. Think about that. You get paid in the morning. By lunch, your salary is worth half as much. By dinner, it's already a memory. Money stopped working. And when money stops working, everything else follows. Most countries, faced with that kind of collapse, do what politicians always do. They hesitate. They soften the blow. They protect jobs that shouldn't exist. They stretch the pain over decades. Poland did the opposite. They brought in a man who looked at the wreckage and said something no one wanted to hear. If we don't shock this system back to life, it will rot forever. That man was Leszek Balcerowicz, and what followed became one of the most extreme economic experiments of the 20th century. Shock therapy. Not gradual reform. Not careful calibration. A chainsaw. On January 1st, 1990, Poland rewrote the rules of reality. Price controls were abolished overnight. Subsidies were slashed. Borders were opened. State factories were told, sink or swim. Most sank. For ordinary people, it was hell. Guaranteed jobs vanished. Unemployment exploded. Bread prices skyrocketed. In some regions, unemployment hit 20%. People sold furniture on the street just to eat. Organized crime flourished. Scams were everywhere. The state pulled back, and chaos rushed in to fill the vacuum. It was the economic equivalent of going cold turkey on heroin while running a marathon. And here's the part that still makes economists uncomfortable. It worked. By ripping off the Band-Aid, Poland stopped hyperinflation in its tracks. Within 2 years, shelves were full, not because the government ordered it, but because it was finally profitable to sell things again. The pain was concentrated. The lesson was learned. A generation grew up knowing one thing: no one is coming to save you. So they hustled. Millions of small businesses were born out of desperation. Not ideology, not optimism, fear. And while Western Europe drifted toward comfort, regulation, and complacency, Poland was being forged in something far less polite: economic trauma. But the true test wasn't the 1990s. The true test came when the entire global system cracked. Because surviving your own collapse is one thing, surviving everyone else's collapse is something else entirely. In the next section, we're going to fast forward to 2008, to the moment the world imploded. Banks collapsed and Europe panicked, and uncover how Poland, of all places, ignored the apocalypse. How paranoia became an advantage. How refusing the euro saved an economy, and why being boring turned out to be a superpower. The Green Island. How Poland ignored a global apocalypse. Fast forward to 2008. The year the world discovered that finance is just confidence with better suits. Lehman Brothers collapses. The U.S. housing market implodes. Credit freezes. Europe, panic spreads like smoke through a closed room. Greece begins its long public humiliation. Spain's construction boom turns into a graveyard of half-finished apartments. Ireland, the supposed Celtic tiger, suddenly looks like a wounded animal. The entire global financial system starts trembling. And here's the part people forget. Inside the European Union, the crash wasn't selective. Almost everyone fell. Germany shrank. France shrank. Italy shrank. The UK shrank. Then there was Poland. Poland didn't just hold on. It grew by roughly 2.8%. One country in the EU stayed green while the rest bled red. Economists called it the Green Island. Like Poland had found some magical shield against global catastrophe. But it wasn't magic. It was something far more human, paranoia, and a little luck. The paranoia came from the 1990s. That trauma taught Polish institutions a lesson Western banks forgot the moment money got cheap. Debt is not a toy. While American lenders were handing out mortgages to people who couldn't afford a hamster, let alone a house, Polish banks remained cautious. Conservative underwriting, limited exposure to toxic assets, smaller consumer credit booms. Not because bankers were saints, because the country still had living memory of what happens when money lies. And Poland's financial regulator, watching the chaos of post-communist transition, tended to supervise with suspicion rather than optimism. In 2008, caution became a superpower. But that's only the first layer. The deeper reason Poland survived is the one most Europeans don't like to admit. Poland refused to join the euro. One decision mattered more than 1,000 speeches. When the crisis hit, the Polish sea vote fell rapidly against the euro. If you were a Polish tourist buying coffee in Paris, it was painful. But if you were a Polish factory exporting furniture, appliances, or parts into the eurozone, it was a jackpot. Overnight, Polish goods became dramatically cheaper relative to Western competitors. In a recession, consumers become brutal. They stop buying pride. They buy value. And Poland suddenly offered value at scale. This is what currency flexibility does during a shock. It acts like a shock absorber. While countries like Greece and Spain were trapped in the euro's straitjacket, unable to devalue their way back into competitiveness, floating currency did the dirty work quietly. Exports rose. Factories kept running. Employment stayed stronger than expected. But there was a third component, and it's where the political machinery reveals itself. Poland didn't just rely on the private sector. It also kept people working through infrastructure spending, roads, rail, stadium, especially around Euro 2012. Part of that was domestic policy. And part of it was something that would become one of the biggest wealth transfers in modern European history. EU funding. While workers in London and Madrid watched layoffs roll in, a worker near Krakow might have been pouring concrete for a new motorway. It was the moment Poland's identity shifted. For decades, Poland was the poor cousin of Europe. Suddenly, it looked like the smart one in the room. And then something even more strategic happened almost quietly. The global economy was reorganizing. Supply chains were being questioned. Shipping was becoming risk. Distance was becoming a liability. And Poland sat in the perfect place on the map. Which brings us to the next pillar of the miracle. Poland didn't try to become China. It became something better for Europe. It became the workshop next door. In the next section, we'll move from the macro story into the factory floor. How Poland integrated into Germany's supply chain. Why complex, cheap labor beat simple, cheap labor. How special economic zones pulled in global capital, and why Poland became so essential that if it stopped working tomorrow, German industry would collapse by Tuesday. The workshop of Europe. How Poland beat the West at manufacturing. If you drive on the Autobahn in Germany today, pay attention to the trucks, not the brand names. The license plates, every third one seems to carry the same two letters. Place. That's not an accident. That's the Polish economic model in motion. while much of the world was obsessing over China as the factory of everything. Poland quietly positioned itself as something far more valuable to Europe. The factory next door. Shipping a container from Shenzhen to Hamburg takes 40 days. Shipping a truck from Wrocław to Munich takes 4 hours. In a world where supply chains were supposed to be invisible, Poland made proximity a weapon. But geography alone doesn't create a miracle. Plenty of countries sit next to rich neighbors and remain poor. Poland's insight was sharper. They didn't try to compete on cheap labor. They competed on complex labor at a discount. Imagine you're an executive at Volkswagen or Mercedes-Benz. You need engines, dashboards, wiring harnesses, seats components that require precision, reliability, and engineering discipline. German workers are excellent. They're also expensive. High wages, shorter work weeks, long vacations, rigid labor rules. Just across the border, you find something unusual. Polish workers who are technically educated, trained in hard sciences from the communist era, culturally conditioned to get it done, and paid a fraction of the cost. This wasn't sweatshop labor. This was industrial competence. Poland didn't hollow out German industry. It plugged into it. Economists began joking that Poland wasn't an independent economy at all. It was just Germany's subcontractor. And the joke stuck because it was mostly true. Look at household appliances, washing machines, dishwashers, refrigerators. If you buy a major European brand today, Bosch, Siemens, Whirlpool, there's a high probability it was made in Poland. Poland became the largest producer of white goods in the entire EU. Then came the policy layer that locked this in: special economic zones. The government designated specific regions and told foreign investors, build here, and you won't pay corporate tax for up to 10 years. Capital flooded in. Amazon built massive logistics centers. Google expanded engineering operations. JP Morgan Chase moved back office and technical teams. But here's the uncomfortable truth behind the miracle. It worked because Polish workers paid the price. According to OECD data, Polish workers average around 1,800 hours per year. German workers average closer to 1,300. That's roughly 500 extra hours a year, often for significantly lower pay. Poland didn't beat the West by being clever alone. It beat the West by being hungrier. The miracle looks very different depending on where you stand. From Berlin, it looks like efficiency. From Brussels, it looks like convergence. From Warsaw's suburbs, it often looks like exhaustion. But the model worked. Poland made itself indispensable. If Polish factories stopped tomorrow, German industry would feel it within days. Supply chains would snap. Costs would surge. Delays would ripple outward. This is what real leverage looks like in a modern economy. Not slogans, not ideology, dependency. But factories alone don't create wealth at a national scale. You can build everything and still lose to bad roads. And in the early 2000s, Poland's infrastructure was a joke. Which brings us to the most controversial chapter of the miracle. The moment Poland pulled off one of the largest wealth transfers in modern European history. Used other people's money to build an export machine. In the next section, we're diving into the EU funds. How Poland paved itself into prosperity. How cohesion money became economic judo. And why some in Western Europe are now quietly wondering whether they paid to create their own competitor. The Golden Reign. How Poland used Europe's money to build an export machine on May 1, 2004. Poland joined the European Union. On paper, it looked like a ceremonial milestone: flags, speeches, handshakes. In reality, it unlocked one of the largest transfers of capital in modern peacetime history. Before that date, moving goods across Poland was an exercise in endurance. There were almost no highways. Single-lane roads cut through towns, tractors crawled along shoulders, and accidents were routine. Driving 500 kilometers from Warsaw to Berlin could take 10 hours. Logistics strangled productivity. Distance erased competitiveness. Then the money arrived. Not loans, not charity. Cohesion funds the EU's mechanism for dragging poorer members up to speed so the single market actually works. Between 2004 and 2020, Poland received a net transfer of roughly $127 billion. With the current budget cycle, the total approaches figures that invite uncomfortable comparisons to the Marshall Plan. Think of it this way. A rich uncle shows up to your collapsing house and says, I'll pay for the roof, the driveway, the plumbing, and the wiring. All you have to do is follow my rules." Poland didn't hesitate. It ran, but here's where the story gets sharper. Poland didn't scatter the money across vanity projects. It didn't drown it in bureaucracy. It aimed the funds like a weapon. Infrastructure first. Over 4,000 kilometers of expressways and motorways were built. Rail lines modernized. Border crossings streamlined. Suddenly, that truck full of appliances could reach Hamburg in half the time. Speed is money. Reliability is leverage. Cities changed next. Historic centers in Gdańsk, Wrocław, and Poznań were rebuilt. Public transport modernized. Sewage systems, sexy but decisive, were overhauled. The country didn't just look better, it functioned better. Then agriculture. Polish farmers, terrified of EU competition before accession, found themselves receiving direct subsidies. They modernized equipment, increased yields, and pivoted toward exports. Poultry, mushrooms, apples. If you eat in Europe, there's a good chance something on your plate came from Poland. But here's the part few people say out loud. This wasn't charity. Western Europe knew exactly what it was doing. Germany and its neighbors paid for roads so their trucks could drive on them. They stabilized the region to avoid chaos on their borders. They expanded the single market to sell into it. What they didn't expect was how Poland would respond. Because Poland played economic judo, it took the money, built the infrastructure, and then used that infrastructure to lower its own logistics cost-making. Polish firms more competitive against the very countries that funded the roads. German tax heroes helped build an export machine that now eats into German market share. You have to admire the audacity. By the late 2010s, Poland wasn't just assembling products, it was pivoting. From coal to code, from factories to servers. And the signal flare came from an unlikely place. Video games? A group of former CD pirates in Warsaw built a studio called CD, Project Red. Their breakout success, The Witcher, wasn't just entertainment. It was proof. Proof that Poland's real hidden resource wasn't land or oil, it was math. The communist education system, for all its failures, produced engineers, physicists, programmers, hard science graduates by the thousands. When the Iron Curtain fell, that talent didn't disappear. It waited. Global firms noticed. Tech companies opened R&D hubs, not call centers. Banks outsourced core systems. Polish developers wrote code that now runs quietly behind financial apps in London and New York. Then Poland skipped a step entirely. While Americans still wrote checks and Germans clung to cash, Poland built a mobile payment system that made transactions instant and universal. 6 digits. 1 second. Done. A new middle class emerged, not factory survivors, but software engineers. Designers, analysts, 20-8-year-olds, buying apartments in Warsaw, fueling domestic demand, reshaping cities. But progress always cuts unevenly. As wealth concentrated in major cities, a divide opened. Poland, urban, liberal, globally connected. Poland, rural, conservative, aging, left behind. This tension became political fuel. And beneath it all, a threat money can't fix. Demographics. In the next section, we confront the cliff edge of the miracle, a fertility rate far below replacement, a nation shrinking each year, a workforce sustained by immigration it once rejected, and the hard question of whether growth can survive when the nursery is empty. This is where the model is tested, not by markets, but by time. The verdict, hunger, momentum, and the price of catching up there is a moment in every economic miracle when growth stops being a celebration and starts becoming a question. Poland is standing in that moment now. Because beneath the highways, the factories, the software hubs, and the rising skylines, there is a silence that no amount of GDP growth can drown out. The nurseries are empty. Poland's fertility rate has fallen to around 1.26 children per woman, far below the 2.1 needed just to hold the population steady. Each year, the country shrinks by the size of a small city. This isn't a future problem. It's happening now, and the irony is brutal. The very shock therapy that saved the economy in the 1990s also scarred an entire generation. Millennials learned early that stability is fragile, that promises are temporary, and that security must be self-built. So they delayed families. They chased income. They left. For years, Poland's biggest export wasn't furniture or copper. It was people. After EU accession, more than 2 million young Poles moved west to the UK, Germany, Ireland. They fixed pipes in London, staffed hospitals in Dublin, paid taxes somewhere else. This was the brain drain phase of the miracle. And then, quietly, it began to reverse. As Western Europe grew more expensive, more chaotic, and more insecure, something unexpected happened. Poles started coming home. They looked at rent in London. They looked at crime statistics. They looked at stagnating wages. Then they looked at Poland safer, cleaner, still growing. The calculation flipped. At the same time, Poland did something that would have sounded unthinkable a decade earlier. It imported labor. Ukrainians first, then workers from Belarus, India, Nepal, the Philippines. The same political system that won votes by shouting "no migrants" quietly presided over the largest immigration wave in Polish history because the economy demanded hands. If you order food in Warsaw today, there's a good chance the courier isn't Polish. This is what economic necessity looks like when ideology runs out of room. And then came 2022. Russia invaded Ukraine. For Poland, history snapped back into focus. This wasn't an abstract geopolitical crisis. This was memory returning. And Poland reacted with speed that shocked the rest of Europe. Defense spending surged past 4% of GDP, higher than almost any NATO country. Tanks, artillery, jets, helicopters. Not symbolic purchases. Industrial scale. But this wasn't just about fear. It was about leverage. Poland began building a domestic defense industry, manufacturing, assembling, exporting. Military spending turned into jobs, technology transfer, and political weight. Warsaw stopped being a peripheral capital. It became the bouncer at Europe's door. Security shifted east. Influence followed. And yet, despite all of this, despite the growth, the factories, the roads, the guns, the most dangerous phase of the miracle is only beginning. Economists call it the middle-income trap. Getting rich from poor is easy by comparison. You copy, you build, you work cheap, you hustle. But going from middle income to truly wealthy is where most countries stall. Wages in Poland have risen sharply. In major cities, skilled professionals earn salaries not far from Southern Europe. This is good for workers. It's dangerous for the model, because Poland can no longer win by being cheaper. And it isn't yet dominant by being innovative. This is the narrow bridge. Either Poland learns to create global brands, original technology, and intellectual property. It risks becoming another country that almost made it. There are signs of success. Electric buses sold across Europe. Logistics innovations exported abroad. Tech firms building real products, not just services. There are also warning signs. State-led industrial projects that stall. Bureaucracy creeping back. Politics polarizing incentives. History is ruthless here. Momentum is everything. 30 years ago, Poland looked at the West with envy. Today, young Poles don't dream of leaving. They compare. And in many ways, Poland has already beaten the West not by outsmarting it, but by remembering what the West forgot. Hunger, discipline, acceptance of pain. The West grew rich and decided comfort was permanent. Poland grew uncomfortable and decided growth was survival. But success carries a risk more dangerous than poverty: complacency. The same bureaucracy that slowed Western Europe is forming in Warsaw. The same demographic collapse is knocking. The same temptation to protect instead of compete is rising. The Polish miracle was not a gift. It was a 30-year ultramarathon through mud. They caught the leaders. Now comes the hardest part: passing them. And that is the final lesson. The West is not a permanent club. It's a mindset. Right now, that mindset is alive in Poland. The question is not whether Poland beat the West. The question is whether it can avoid becoming it.